the top of the class on a roll.
Hey, it's Renmar, and welcome back to another episode of MPL Soundcheck, a weekly show where we talk about the latest news and happenings in MDL and MPL Philippines. There's a lot to talk about, so let's start things off as always with week 2. Not as always, but with week 2 of MDL Philippines. Now, I messaged the casters in MDL of suggestions for topics for this week's show because, of course, I can't watch MDL Philippines as much as I would want to. So I defer to them for their expert suggestions. And after like a quick scope of what everyone was saying, 2 things kept popping up. So we'll start things off with the first one, which is the Yin and Amon Gold Lane pickups for the side of TNC Neo against Zol Esports. Now, the Yin Gold Lane, played by TNC Neo, against Zol in game number 2 of their series in week 2. It struggled, and it was a great example of the biggest problem of Ian, which is he is still super dependent on his combo landing. We all know that combo end up in the ult, you get stunned, and then you get pounds the ground, and then you get damaged. It's a one-time big time thing. And as we all know with Yin, I mean, dude deals a lot of damage. But if he cannot get that catch, it is close over for him. Although Yin works really well in our ranked games, and I have been placed against and with some incredibly talented Yin players who know how to play the hero well. But it seems like even the pros, once it gets to the professional level type of games, it is difficult to pull off. And lately, I've been finding myself a little bit more okay with going up against Yins, even though I play like a lot of Eves and Valentinas and such. So he is still dependent on his stun. And there was one play from game number 2 of their series wherein at around 20 minutes and 52 seconds, you can see it on your screen right now, he initiated the duel against Ryle, the mid laner of Zol Esports, and the Yin lost. The key thing about that is because Ryle also had the Purify as a Valentina, which means that just pop that Purify, don't worry about the stun. You have 2 dashes, get away from him in his little circle of doom in his separate realm, and then you should be good. However, the Amon pick in game number 3, I really like the idea of. And again, look back at your screens. As you can see here in the draft, Amon was last picked. And there is no marksman on the side of Zol Esports. Because of the lineup they decided to go for, which was more on the magical damage output of a Valentina and a Lunox together. And of course, the physical damage output of a Benedetta and a Fanny. TNC Neo could afford to not pick up a marksman. They didn't need to. They were probably also just wanted to see how this Amon would work out because they already have a source of basic attack, physical, and magic damage because the Ling always builds like Berserker's Fury plus Wind Docker to maximize that magic crit. They already have the basic attack damage coming from the Ling, and then everyone else is just mainly magic damage. TNC Neo had the Amon, they had the Eve, and then they had the Glue. So on paper and theoretically, the principle of drafting the Amon in the last pick is there. They also have a good catch on the Franco. So if ever whoever Franco catches, that's what the Amon hurts, and then that's like a quick -1. They had an answer for Fanny. So draft wise, the Amon pick made a lot of sense, and probably why it had a much better performance in game number 3. Although it's still struggled compared to the other members of TNC Neo. Mira had a difficult time with making it work as much as he would want to, but also because Zol Esports answered him very well. TNC Neo still ended up walking away from the series with a victory, and they were finally able to get their first win of the season of MDL Philippines. The storyline actually for that matchup was that Zol and TNC were going into this without a series win yet. And so congratulations to them for getting their series win, TNC Neo. And with that done, the second thing that the caster suggested me that I should take a look at would be the game between Bren Euphoria and GameLab. Now, there's a lot of history between these two teams. After Cerebrum Esports, the longtime kings of the amateur scene, the team that had like an 11 championship winning run in the amateurs. Actually, it's even more, but if you count really like the major tournaments, the big name tournaments, it's 11. Um, After they were acquired from by Minana, as we all know right now, is Next Play Evos. Um, it pretty much became or not Bren, but Euphoria and GameLab as the biggest names in the scene. In the past few months before MDL, they were duking it out in finals as well. So this is a rivalry from the amateurs now in the MDL, and it's one of those games where it was a 2-0, but the final scoreline does not reflect the quality, the drama, the tension that this series had. Game number one was a crazy back and forth. Like you could just tell there's so much history between these two teams, how well they were playing against each other, how well they knew each other's positionings and all that. It was an amazing series, and it was even a one game winning set for GameLab's Romer Dockman on the Kufra, which eventually led to GameLab winning the first game. That said, led to a 4-kill. It left Bren Euphoria mid laner Ryujin to hold, and then GameLab would end up winning game number 2 as well. It was a great game. More GameLab sided in game 2, whereas in game number 1 it was very close, a little bit more Bren Euphoria sided. Game number 2 was a little bit further, close enough for Bren Euphoria, but a little bit further and more GameLab sided. And if you haven't watched that series, I suggest you go back and watch it. And another suggestion from the casters to watch, if you haven't seen the games from last week of MDL Philippines, is to watch Next Play Tiger Cubs versus Smart Omega Neos. I haven't had the time to check it out myself. I only got to skim through it. But they told me it was a really great series as well for the Tiger Cubs and Smart Omega Neos. So I suggest you go on watch that. And before we wrap up everything in MDL Philippines, this is going to be super fast only for MDL. I want to congratulate the MVP of Week 2, Yuktizi. The man played 4 games as Moskov in Week 2, and he won all of them. And that is an undefeated Moskov as well, because GameLab has yet to drop a game. They are the current kings of MDL PH. As we take a quick look at the standings, you see there up top, 5 matches won by GameLab, 0 losses, 100% win match rate and game rate 15, way above the pack. They are 6 points ahead of Omega Neos. They are 7 ahead of Echo, 8 ahead of Blacklist Academy. That's just how crazy good this GameLab team is. And for those who were unfamiliar with GameLab going into this, watching the MDL, the casters each and every week, especially in week 1, did a tremendous job of making sure that the viewers knew the stories of these teams going into it. And I think after week number 1, with the GameLab's great play, the input coming in from the casters, the storytelling, it's very clear now who GameLab is, why they're in this position, why it shouldn't be a surprise that they are just an incredibly great team, and even defeating the MPL back teams. GameLab was one of the teams invited into MDL Philippines Season 1. So congratulations to, again, the MVP of Week 2, Yuktizi, and GameLab for their current hot streak. And with that done for MDL PH, let's talk about all of the great happenings of MPL Philippines Week 2. So, now for MPL Philippines Season 11, Week 2, I can actually divide the 3 days we had into, days with their own specific names. So, day number 1 is what I would like to call the Day of Gold Laners, where we saw Omega versus RSG and Bren versus NXPE, both series ending in 2-0. But it was the Gold Laners for both teams that really stood out for the day, because Kelra up against RSG got back-to-back MVP games, and Super Marco for Bren Esports got back-to-back MVP games. In Omega versus RSG, Omega getting their first series win of the season, defeating RSG 2-0. It was just man, Kelra going God mode on back-to-back Harith games. He played Gold Lane Harith. In game number 1, it was like almost completely pure RSG controlled up until one Lord fight, where Kelra miraculously got to steal the Lord away with just the raw damage output of a Harith. And then in game number 2, it was more an Omega-sided game. They had Kufra, Farsa, and Harith, or Kufra and Farsa for Miko and Stome, or respectively, the roamer and mid laner, and then Harith again on the hands of Kelra. And then Ryzen even played like one of the up and coming picks right now that's been played a lot more often in MDL especially, which is Lancelot with a tank build, a tank-salot, as Manjin on the Filipino broadcast called it. Ryzen also had a great game number 2, 0-1 and 7, but the story of Omega versus RSG with Omega defeating RSG 2-0 was really Kelra going God mode. And then in the second game of the day, Bren versus NXPE. In game 1, NXP actually controlled the fight until Bren won a team fight and a Lord, and eventually Bren was able to control it because with NXP being in the lead and control for most of the game, NXP suddenly felt what it'd be like if it was a bit more even and the Diggy had a little bit more room to plant the bombs, get vision, and much more comfortably. It made it hard for NXP to find a comeback. Once Bren got control, they had a Diggy with them as the roamer, Bren Esports. They also had Super Marco and the Melissa. So once Bren got control, they just didn't let go of it. And they took down NXP in game number 1. In game number 2, it was just total Bren. There's one sequence here, I'm showing it on your screen right now, wherein NXPE forced the play after taking down Kyle TZ and being up a man. So it was a 5 versus 4 advantage without the Hayabusa. So it made sense to try and attempt something, make something happen, in the map. But Bren just countered it beautifully. So you can see on your screen, Super Marco was able to walk away and stayed back from the fight. Look how far he is, really staying safe. And man, Few was able to get a Winter Truncheon off because he was the target found eventually by Brusco, the roamer of Next Play Evos. And they got the knock-up on the Valentina. But before he could get the combo off, Few was able to use the Winter Truncheon. Or I believe it was before he got knocked out. But around that time, he used the Winter Truncheon. He avoided going down. Bren counterplayed. Super Marco rejoined the fight. And that was all she wrote for Next Play Evil. So day 1 was a day of gold laners, with Kelra and Super Marco being the stars. Day number 2, on the other hand, it was what I called, and I even made a poster for it, which is there on your screen right now. It's the day of champions, because RSG, the reigning MSC champions, Echo, the reigning world champions, and Blacklist International, the reigning MPL PH champions, all won their series in a single day. Only in MPL Philippines, folks, where you can see this. Actually, even you can technically count, like there were people commenting. I received a few comments that you could also say reigning Southeast Asian Games gold medalist champions as well, because the Blacklist team is there. So like, yeah, technically, so like all the major titles when we think about like MLBB, like we have it in the bag. And so in the first series of day number 2, it was RSG versus TNC. Light's MVP performance on a Franco, his hooks and Bloody Hunt catches in game 1 made it a very dominating game for RSG. When a Franco is hot, it's hard to come back from that because you're always down a man. It's hard for you to make a play. Your opposing team will always have an advantage in the major objective fights, Turtles and Lords. Game number 2, the lineup of RSG was great. I love their draft. It was Cho, Rome, Barrett's Jungle, which was last pick if I'm not mistaken, and Edith 4th picked XP laner. And that tanky front line was set up for Farsa and Melissa. Now, they controlled majority of the game because of their lineup. Light had a fantastic Cho game with the pickoffs that he was getting off and the tempo he was setting with how fast he was getting into key positions in the map. But during an attempt to end the game, TNC got to defend successfully with Escalera on the Rome Grok getting a great wild charge, catch onto Eman, and Cram finding Exort just in time, just as he was close to falling. That was supposed to be the game-winning siege of RSG. Now, TNC got the Lord and pushed bottom lane, and eventually it evened out the gold. However, a great play from Light on your screens right now, who was all the way in the mid lane to catch Ninja Killer, is what spelled the doom for TNC Pro Team. No one would expect in that scenario that Light would be there. The path he took to get to that shrub, he went from close to his orange buff, that topside shrub in the mid lane, past the minions, making sure to avoid minions, and then in that shrub behind Ninja Killer. It was such a good play by RSG. It was the perfect kick. Exort was just able to land the feathered airstrike right at the edge of the feathered airstrike onto Ninja Killer, with RSG eventually sandwiching the members of the NC Pro Team. RSG ended up getting that win. Now in series number 2 for day 2, Echo versus Onyx, it was a 2-1. So Onyx PH dished Echo their first game loss of the season, but not their series loss, because eventually Echo would win. In game number 1, Sanji played a mid lane Julian, which was paired up with a Yuzhong that had a Petrify and a Kadita Roamer who also had a Petrify. So it was just a lot of damage, and it was a struggle for Onyx to go up against how well they were breaking the tempo over and over again. Echo, Benny Cutie played the Melissa, and it was a quick game. 12 minutes and 45 seconds, dominating win for Echo. With a lineup like that, with a surprise mid-lane Julian pickup like that coming in from Sanji, the first Julian game of the season, I think Onyx was just like caught off guard. Game number 2, on the other hand, it was Echo who got caught off guard. Super Prince had a Farsa MVP performance, and it kept the game close for Onyx. His positioning and timing with a feathered airstrike, the stunts he was getting off, fantastic. Along with Sensui and the Karina having a fantastic performance as well. And one of the major points I kept making throughout the weekend is how we really got to see and feel that the importance of lineups that have in specific scenarios that have to have at least 2 major sources of magic damage. It's hard to pull off a lineup that's 4 physical damage and then just 1 magic damage. I'm looking at a lineup that only has a Valentina here. Usually that's the case. Team first picks prioritizes Valentina as the draft goes on. They don't have another source of magic damage. It's mostly physical. They only have the Valentina as a source of magic damage. But in game 2, Onyx rectified that by picking up the Karina, who of course deals magic damage, and even though she's built tank, she deals a great amount of damage with her ultimate, and the finishing execution aspect of her ultimate paired up with a Farsa and the burst damage she can dish out is a lot of magic damage in theory. So there's a little tip for y'all. And one thing I look out for personally in drafts. But with the great performance of Sensui, Super Prince, and of course the entirety of Onyx, I really want to put focus here on Kekadut, the roamer, because the last 2 team fights were highlighted by him getting major catches with the Rubies I'm Offended. In what would be the last Lord fight of the game, if I'm not mistaken, Onyx initiated the Lord fight. The second Lord fight. Oh, sorry, this was the second Lord fight. They initiated the Lord fight, but Echo counter-punished. The initiation came from a play very similar to what Echo likes to pull off, or they showed more in M4, where they would go to the shrubs in the lane closest to where the Lord is. So the side lane shrubs, closest to where the Lord is, and then their pathing would be like from that shrub, get the enemy behind. At least 2 members of Onyx would be there, or 3, while the other 2, usually the jungler, are in the Lord area, trying to just poke and make it look like, oh, look at us, blah blah, like distraction like that. But Echo countered that, and Benny Cutie got a triple kill despite Onyx getting the Lord. So Echo still had to clear the Lord. However, they got set up for this. A beautiful play by Kekadut. Right after an initiation from Yaoi, Echo couldn't burst down Kekadut. Kekadut backed off a bit, used Conceal onto the other members of Onyx. That allowed them to push forward. Kekadut flickered past the wall, closer to the purple buff of Echo, pulled them back, And then Onyx just followed it up. Great call as well by Nets in the sequence to flicker forward, find Benny Cutie, stun him with a second skill, pop his Wind of Nature, avoid the damage, take him down. Onyx game number 2. And in game number 3, it was an unfortunate loss for Onyx, but a crazy one for Echo because Onyx had a Natalia which tempered Sanji on the far so often. Sanji either kept getting picked off or he was forced to go back and cancel his feathered airstrike or stop it altogether just to get away, and then he'll rejoin with just his first skill and second skill available. And Sensui won almost all of the major retribution battles. Before the final Lord, that Carl Tizzy was able to retribution away from Sensui, Echo only won one Lord, and that was a relatively free one. It was them after winning a team fight sequence. So it was a relatively free Lord. Carl Tizzy got it. But all throughout, Sensui had a monster performance on the Karina jungle. But as I said on the English cast, you can land all the retributions you want in a game, but there will always be that one retribution that mattered the most. And Carl Tizzy was the one that landed. Onyx, a fantastic performance from them in this series. But of course, congratulations to the defending world champs, Echo, still keeping their series win streak intact. Still undefeated. And then for game 3 of day number 2, we were treated to, honestly, it was, to me, one of the most technical, beautifully technical games of MLBB this season, up until a certain game that I'll mention later. But this was one of my favorites, Blacklist versus Omega. So Oh My Venus got back-to-back MVPs in this game. And game 1 was highlighted by what we called in the English cast as a Lord musical. It wasn't just one Lord dance, or I'm sure you know the term Lord dance that we use often, where teams are just like dancing around the Lord trying to see who gets it, who's going to execute first, who's going to pull the trigger first in terms of the battle, who win the retribution. That's a Lord dance. This was a Lord musical because it was one Lord being danced around for like 3 to 5 minutes. It was a long time for just that one Lord. And even though Omega helped Kelra win the gold lane over Super Red super quickly, and Omega even got to break the mid lane tower super quickly, Blacklist's masterful Lord take turned everything around. Oh My Venus's timing on the Diggy, the reverse time punish onto Miko, who over and over again just wanted to get vision. But then one reverse time, Blacklist would be like, get that Hilton down, would take him down. And then it just got to the point where Omega could barely contest the Lord anymore. All of the efforts Omega did to build a relatively big snowball lead was just completely turned around by Blacklist committing to that Lord, not giving it up, and making sure that they got trades that if ever they lost members and had to go back, Omega wouldn't be able to get the Lord without a problem. And then in game number 2, Blacklist knew what they needed to do against the Hanzo jungle of Omega. Omega played the jungle Hanzo. It was a long game determined by Lord fights and vying for positioning around them. So this one was now more, but multiple Lord dances. It was a very long game. And it was just Blacklist in control. But there were so many times Omega could have taken it back. Omega were doing like everything right in terms of like how are they managing the minion waves, how are they managing the team fights to set things up for Ryzen on the Hanzo jungle, who was a menace for Blacklist, but Blacklist handled it really well. Omega showed up, but Blacklist was able to get the 2-0 series win. This was if you're like a MLBB geek, you know, like an analyst like me, or you just love analyzing the games, this is one to watch. It was a beautiful one. Now in day 3 of MPL Philippines Week 2 is what I would call the day of drama. And I'll explain why. So it started off with Bren Esports defeating TNC 2-0. It was a dominating series by Bren. Dominating series. Game 1, Ogwen MVP performance set the tempo. He was an Atlas. Super Marco had a monster Melissa performance. He had a 7, 2, and 6 stat line. That's a total of 13 kills. Bren had 15 kills the entire game. Crazy. And then in game number 2, it was the same story. Last pick, Diggy plus Faramis for Bren Esports. Too much utility for TNC to play comfortably against. So, the last series of the week and the last one for day number 3 was a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous series between Onyx Philippines and Next Play Evos. It ended 2-1, but there's a lot of story between them as well. Next Play Evos, of course, we know as Minana, the members of Onyx coming in the season earlier over the Minana/Cerebrum team. They were a team called Monster Anarchy before Onyx, and the Monster Anarchy team also was one of the best amateur teams at its time. So he was up there with they were up there with games like Euphoria, GameLab, Cerebrum, Monster Anarchy. That was their storyline there, and Onyx dominated game 1, but I actually don't want to talk about this game too much. I will just show you this photo on your screen right now, and that is just a little teaser of what to expect from this series if you haven't seen it. I swear, if you haven't seen it yet, please do. The VODs are up on the official MPL Philippines YouTube channel. Go ahead and watch it. That's how good this series was. The drama of day number 3 with TNC still unable to get a game win. Close multiple times these past 2 weeks, but still not able to get it. The beating they received from Bren looking really strong, and the drama that was Onyx versus Next Play Evos 2-1. A little story that I would like to share. After the loss, Next Play Evos fought valiantly, but you could see how defeated they look after that loss, how disappointed they were that they lost what was a beautiful, hard-fought game. And they looked like a team that just lost the playoffs or championship. But that goes to show how passionate Next Play Evos are and how passionate our pro teams are. That even in a regular season game, 2 weeks in, on the third day, you'd feel all that emotion. And for you to understand why, please, again, watch Onyx versus Next Play Evos. Week 2, day number 3, MPL Philippines, Season 11. It's one of those games that it's better experienced than heard about. All right. And with that, let's load up the standings of MPL Philippines so far. Bren Esports up top. They've dropped the series, but they have played 4 games, and they have themselves 9 points. They take the first place at the end of week number 2. Echo, still the only undefeated team in series. They are 1 point behind Bren Esports. Blacklist International and RSG with a similar record, tied at 6. You have Onyx at 5th place with 5 points, a point above Next Play Evos, and Omega, who have almost similar records, except that it is just more games played and series played for Omega, but they both have 4 points, and of course TNC still at 0. So in MPL Philippines Week 2, we had the day of gold laners, the day of champions, and the day of drama. So hopefully the things I talked about in this would encourage you to go back and watch some games that maybe you haven't seen or missed out on yet, because I've been loving MPL Philippines Season 11 so far. It's a lot of 2-0s, but the quality of games and the stories behind them are just amazing. So let's talk about the schedule for next weekend, March 3 to 5, Week 3 of MPL Philippines Season 11. Blacklist versus Onyx and TNC versus Echo for March 3. For March 4, you have Next Play Evos versus Omega, TNC versus Onyx, Bren versus RSG. And to close out our week 3, on day number 3, you have Echo versus Next Play Evos and RSG Philippines versus Blacklist International, the reigning MSC champions versus the reigning MPL Philippines champions. And that is it for this episode of MPL Soundcheck. Thank you so much for all your support and all for the encouraging comments that I see, the views, the likes, really egging me on to continue this series and not stop. So I'm gonna continue it. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and please watch out for the third episode of Sights and Sounds coming this either Wednesday or Thursday. It's gonna be a monster to edit. I took way more clips than I thought I did, so there's a lot of clips to go through. But I'm gonna take my time to edit them, but make sure to have it out by Wednesday and Thursday. Without sacrificing the quality of the series or to hopefully improve from the previous episodes. All right, that's it for MPL Philippines Soundcheck. I'll see you for MPL Philippines Week 3 and next week for the next episode of Soundcheck. See ya.